Well, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana faces a tough act, when he delivers his midterm budget tomorrow. But what if we simplify the budget into a household budget and try to address its challenges? Personal finance guru Mai Fisher-French talks us through this at this time. And Mai, thank you so much for your time. Listen, I think a household personal budget speech is important, especially for the little ones. We need mom and dad to play finance minister at least once a month and have a budget speech, because sometimes I know we can get carried away with expecting mom and dad to pay for everything. So let's talk about how we can simplify, the household budget, especially during this tough economic times. Any tips you can share?
Yes, so I think I always look at the government budget and I think it looks a lot like South Africans' household budgets. If you are continuously spending more than you get in, which many households are doing, you have this increasing reliance on loans. And that's very much what has happened with the South African government since 2008. You've had what we call this budget deficit. So we're now in a situation where every year government is having to borrow more and more. We expect government debt to reach 5.5 trillion by 2024. So at the moment, government spends about 21 cents of every tax rand that it collects just on interest payments. So I always think it's a very similar. If you're sitting in that sort of situation as a household, what do you do? What are your options? Of course, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to cut non-essential spending. And that's what we're expecting to hear more about in the medium-term budget. Remember, the medium-term budget is not going to tell us, unfortunately, about tax increases or decreases. That's very specific. We hear about that in February. But we'll get some bigger themed stuff. And one of them is going to be about the debt. How do we start cutting our spendings as a country so that we're not so reliant on debt? But at the same time, if you're a household and you want to perhaps invest, for example, in a solar geyser to cut electricity costs, sometimes you need to have investment spending. So it's important, if you're sitting with your kids, understanding consumption spend versus investment spend. And we're going to be hearing from the minister about how they're going to allocate, find that balance, because you still need to be spending on infrastructure to keep the economy growing, because that's how you generate more money. So maybe you've got a small business and you've got to spend some money on that, or you want to start a side hustle, you've got to invest in that. So finding the difference between those, also really, really important. And of course, also, many households support extended family, especially in unemployment. They have to look, who are unemployed, they have to look in their budgets and say, where do I find this extra money? How do I allocate this money? How do I care for my additional family? We're going to have to see some of that coming out with the extension of the COVID relief grant, talk about a basic income grant. So all of these themes for me are very, very similar to really what we deal with every single day in terms of our own budgets.
Yeah, and one might be wondering, how does the medium-term budget speech impact my personal finances? For those South Africans probably thinking, listen, this is just perhaps for the economists, for the financial experts like Mai Fisher-French. How does it impact me and my family and our household and the conversations we need to be having as a family?
So as I said, the medium-term budget is just sort of tea leaf reading for most of us because it's not specific yet. So in February, we'll get the real detail, but you can sort of look into it and say, right, what are we expecting? One of the big things we're looking at is obviously tax collection, because if we're seeing good tax collection, that is very positive. It's a little bit of a windfall for government, and like us with our 13th check, what can we do with that? And that could also indicate that we're not going to expect tax increases in February. That's a big bone of contention. How do you fund a basic income grant? How do you fund a COVID relief without higher taxes? But we'll be needing to see what he's going to do and how he's going to allocate that additional tax revenue that he would have collected. So that would be one of the signs I would be looking for. I'd also be looking for sort of information around sort of signals sending into the economy around what they're expecting around growth. Are they expecting the economy to grow? What is happening with Eskom? Because of course these are all things that affect us. If Eskom continues to literally keep the load shedding, how is that going to impact us as a family? What is the government doing about it? Those sort of things. I think we're going to be looking at tea leaves and of course predicting to really what we're going to be seeing in February, which is where we get the real information as to how that affects us.